Welcome to Terrible Lizards, a podcast about dinosaurs with Dr. David Hone and Izzy Lawrence. On this week's episode, how birds are related to dinosaurs, and the punk biologist on Archaeopteryx, and the theory of the sexy sun. Welcome to Terrible Lizards. I am Izzy Lawrence. I am not a dinosaur expert, but I do love a good old dino. Opposite me, even though we're not technically sitting in the same... Shut up! We could be sat on top of me, is...
Your other half listens to this, as does my mother.
To be fair, I just think of it, I could be a massive lady and you could be perched on my arm, much like a bird, is Dr. Dave Hone. Imagine you are perched on my arm, Dave.
Keep digging, yes.
And you are some sort of, I would say raptor, really, it's a pigeon. So if... Dave is this lovely wood pigeon, it's sat on my arm. And I'm going, ooh, Dave, what makes you a bird and a dinosaur?
Yeah.
No, because previously, we've done this podcast a lot now, and in it we always say, oh yeah, but birds are dinosaurs. But, and this is the big thing, Dave, right? Dinosaurs are not birds. So, what makes a bird a dinosaur? What makes a dinosaur a bird? And I know we've covered feathers, but do they have anything else in common other than, just being fluffy?
Birds are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are not birds. So, humans are mammals. Not all mammals are humans. So one sits within the other taxonomically. And feathers, we've talked about feathers a lot. We now have dozens of different species of dinosaur which have definitive feathers. We have a bunch of others which have feather-like filaments, which may or may not be feathers, and has some interesting questions for their evolution. And obviously that is in itself an extraordinarily strong line of evidence to associate birds with dinosaurs, or to link the two together. We don't see any other species with these or any other lineages with these features. We do see that. But there's lots of others as well. And obviously, kind of first and foremost, when you're dealing with vertebrate paleontology, we have the skeletons themselves. And there are a bunch of traits in the skeletons that we see in birds and we see in dinosaurs, or at least some dinosaurs, that are not seen in anything else. A really neat one, which is always worth talking about, is a thing called the semi-lunate carpal, or occasionally hemilunate carpal.
The hemilunate carpal. Oh yeah, like carpal tunnel syndrome. Carpal tunnel syndrome is where you can't type anymore because you've been typing too much. I know things.
Yeah. So you have a bunch of bones in your wrist called carpals, and a semi-lunate one is a half-moon one. That's literally what it means. So it's a kind of half-moon shape or a semicircle. And this is a really critically shaped wrist bone, and basically you see it in things like dromaeosaurs, so Velociraptor and its relatives, and you see it in Archaeopteryx, and you see it in various birds, and you don't see it in anything else. And what it allows the wrist to do is to fold back against the arm. Yeah,
this is the trick of being able to touch your little finger to your forearm.
Yeah, if you hold your hand up and then kind of point it down as if you're doing kind of a karate chop, and then keep going. Birds, and a lot of the things nearest to birds, because of the semi-lunate carpal, can keep rotating until not their little fingers, they don't have one anymore, but that side of the hand will end up pointing backwards along the arm towards the elbow.
You can't wrist lock them, Jitsuka in the room. This is, There's a wrist lock called Kosugatami, which is what I know is that. And you can basically get somebody to kneel down before you and hit their face on your kneecap if you're good enough. Just with a simple flick of the wrist that way, because you literally cannot bend that way.
Yeah, and so you often see, both illustrated and then in movies, dinosaurs having what people often call bunny hands. So they kind of flop over like a little bunny rabbit, because obviously the actors or the puppeteers in the suit can't bend their hands backwards. But that's what birds do. And it's a really important part of the wing stroke, but it's also very useful for just kind of getting those big long arm feathers out of the way and tucked up. And so this is something which evolved before flight. I wrote really quite a cool paper on this. There's a colleague of mine called Corwin Sullivan, who's Canadian. It was his idea, but we collaborated on the paper with some other colleagues, looking at basically the angles of this bone and showing how it increased. And so it got basically bigger and bigger and rounder from really quite a long way back.
So It started off as a crescent scarf.
No, it starts off as kind of a blocky cuboid thing, and then slowly kind of opens up.
I was thinking it'd be like a Jaffa Cake advert, but I'm wrong.
Sadly not. But it was really quite neat that you could track this change getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we know as it got bigger, allowing greater flexion, the feathers in the hand were getting longer. So we think that there's a link. So as the feathers get longer, you need more flexion to be able to...
You don't want them to get dusty.
Yeah, to keep them off the ground and get them out the way. So that's a really key feature that links everything together.
And I love the idea that velociraptors, if you haven't listened to our Velociraptor episodes, go back and listen to that if you can, because we talk about mantling, and that made me very excited as to what these feathers were being used for. It's not just air brakes, they might have been used to kill things, or to help kill things.
Yeah, we should do an episode at some point about feather function, because although we've talked about stuff like mantling and insulation and, of course, flight, you can do lots of other things with feathers as well, and birds almost certainly were.
Can you?
Yes.
You could write very elegant letters.
Yes, I'm not sure that was the primary selective pressure.
Oh. They had to attract mates somehow. Maybe it was romantic letters. You can't prove it, though. You probably can. Shut up.
Let's move on. So another big one is the sternum. So the chest. And you see these great big sternal plates. So again, Velociraptor is a great example of this. They have this pair of huge square bones right square in the middle of the chest, which would be big anchor sites for muscles.
Okay, the thing is, now I'm thinking of Xena Warrior Princess, and this is probably wrong, but square.
Yes, and more in the midline.
Okay, less booby and
less
more.
I was about to say less boobalicious, but you've gone there already.
See, booby we can get away with, because technically, if there are any kids listening, we're talking about blue-footed boobies, which are a type of bird. We're not. But Xena Warrior Princess, I watched that when I was a kid, therefore we're allowed to talk about breastplates, just sort of, but roughly where the breastbone would be, where the ribs are.
So they're a large part of what will become the keeled sternum in birds, which is then what they're attaching all their flight muscles to. So, but again, this is something that a large part of this evolved well before flight, and therefore we're seeing these kind of ancestral traits, so you can see them fuse together in later birds, and then they'll add the keel.
So they start off as little sort of like, xenas, and they eventually join together and become this sort of like fin down the middle.
Yeah, they're basically a pair of squares or rectangles, one each side, and then they will fuse together.
So what were they? What was the purpose of them before flight and before they need those muscles?
They're still going to be attaching quite a lot of muscles. That will allow them to move the arms particularly inwards, which again, if you're grabbing things or doing stuff like that, it's probably quite useful.
Climbing trees as well, possibly?
Potentially, yeah. So there's lots of discussion about how well or not things like this could potentially climb. I think they probably could climb quite well. They're just not necessarily well adapted for it. So, of course, one of these things that we're often looking for in skeletons, we talk about ecological interpretations, is you're looking for stuff that you can see in other animals. So we talked about digging before and stuff like this. And there's an obvious suite of digging adaptations. And so if you see them in extinct species like alvarezsaurs, there's a good reason to think that they're doing that kind of stuff. You don't tend to see this in the dromaeosaurs. They don't have obvious climbing adaptations, but they do have pretty good gripping hands and feet with pretty sharp claws on them and a pretty strong arms and a pretty good range of motion of their arms and hands.
They've also got like a massive tail, most of them, which helps with balance.
Potentially when they're up there, though of course the question is getting up there in the first place. And climbing is one of those things where animals which really don't look like they'd be good at climbing are often much better at climbing than you'd think. Like goats.
Oh yeah, goats! God, they're mad.
Yeah, and not just rocks. There's if you just Google, goats in Morocco are notorious for getting into trees and really getting into quite high into trees with narrow branches and trunks that you really wouldn't think a goat could get up.
I think there must be a glitch in the operating system with goats, because there's no. I mean, why? Why? They're just crazy.
It's one of those ones where the truly direct evidence that you'd want, certain specialised claws, certain specialised gripping structures, certain ratios in the hands and feet and ankle joints are not there. but at the same time there is enough other stuff that makes them very credible candidates for being decent climbers. Pretty much the same as us, actually. You know, we don't have a lot of the stuff that gorillas and chimps have and other primates do. You know, we're not great going up and down trees, but we're also not bad at it. If you looked at our adaptations, you'd say we're clearly terrestrial animals, and yet we can climb trees okay.
Well, it depends on the tree. It depends how you're feeling.
True.
There are some people who are definitely more adapted than others.
True.
But also, our minds, we just use tools. So, you know, why do that when you could chop the tree down? Boom.
Yes,
anyway.
Problem solved. But we've got semilunate carpals, we've got sternal plates.
That's the thing that links them to... And so we've got chest plates and we've got carpals.
There are loads of others, but I don't want to go on forever. So a nice little one that you see are things called uncinate processes. So these are little kind of prongs of bone that come off the ribs. So if you think about the ribs of most animals, they've usually got a kind of Y-shaped head, so kind of two little prongs, and then the long, usually curved bit, which is the main bit of the rib.
Okay.
And what birds have, lots of different birds have, and a bunch of dinosaurs, again, Velociraptor is actually a really good example of this, is they have an extra little prong halfway down the long arm of the rib that points backwards.
Yeah.
And these are basically attachment sites for extra bits of muscle to help move the rib cage. So when you're doing deep breaths, you can expand and contract the rib cage a bit better.
Interesting. So why... I mean, for birds, that kind of makes sense because one assumes they're high... In my head, I'm going, well, they're doing lots of aerobic activity that requires deep breaths and all the rest of it.
Yeah, flight is hard work.
What does this tell us about velociraptors and that they needed this extra rib control?
On the one hand, it might just be generally beneficial. I know that sounds a bit of a lame explanation, but if something is an improvement, natural selection will favour it. You know, if these animals happen to evolve a feature which means that they can pump their lungs a little bit better or a little more efficiently, they don't necessarily have to be super strong runners where being able to be a little bit better like that is going to be a huge advantage. It still is an advantage, even if there's not any huge pressure on them right now. However, I suspect in this case it probably is something like that. If you are running around a lot and doing lots of aerobic activities, or even bordering on anaerobic activities, in other words, you're doing so much stuff you're running short of oxygen, then this would probably be quite a good adaptation. Okay,
I'm gonna nerd up on you now. I'm gonna say that anaerobic activity isn't about running out of oxygen. It's about doing something really quickly before you need to. Because aerobic activity, it's sprinting. You're doing all of that.
It's more complicated than that. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just saying. I know when I know something, we can go. That's far more complicated than that. Yeah, exactly. Because I know so little. Could we turn? Because there's a thing, right? And it's not a pterodactyl. It's not a pterodactyl. No, it's fine. It's not a pterodactyl, but it begins with P and it means hollow bones, which I know that they do, like they have, because we've talked about the fact that they have hollow bones because some of them are so very large. You need hollow bones, and this is all the... You know what the word is? It begins with P.
Pneumaticity.
That's the one. I knew it wasn't pterodactyl. We're good.
though pterosaurs are also pneumatic, so that's one of those traits which goes right the way through dinosaurs and probably to the origin of dinosaurs and their nearest relatives, which include things like pterosaurs. So that's probably actually a almost pre-dinosaurian trait, which is then inherited all the way through the dinosaurs and then into birds.
So we have bone marrow from which we make red blood cells. It's proper, nice, strong bones that you can hit with a club and survive. So why do dinosaurs, why do they have this? I mean, birds, it makes sense because you want to be up in the air. Pterosaurs, it makes sense because you want to be light as possible. Why does a velociraptor? Why would it be a beefy velociraptor?
Well, it's fundamentally the same reason. If you can make yourself lighter, then obviously you don't need as much muscle to move you around. You don't need as much food to eat to power that muscle to move you around. These are generally quite good things. The other thing, so bone marrow is an interesting one that ties into two or three odd little different things simultaneously. So we always talk about birds having hollow bones. But the truth is mammals actually have hollow bones. You know, when you get the bone marrow out of a bone, it's hollow in the middle because the bone marrow is in it. There is a cavity for it. Now, the difference is staggering. That is a relatively small hollow in a very big bone, and the equivalent of a bird will be a massive cavity in a very thin bone. But there is that slight oddity of like, oh, it's hollow, therefore it's a bird bone, isn't really quite true. It's the question of the extent of that cavity. So that's the first thing. The second thing, so bone marrow, yes, birds mostly and dinosaurs presumably under the same system wouldn't have been producing wouldn't have producing their red blood cells in their bone marrow because that's where your red blood cells come from. And birds at least have a special organ where they do this separate in the body. But bone marrow is then a weird thing, and this actually, red blood cells are an interesting thing, and this links back to the pneumaticity problem. So our red blood cells are actually really, really efficient. They've got rid of the nucleus, so there's actually more capacity for oxygen carrying per cell.
They're like donutty shaped, so they've got maximum surface area.
Yeah, right. But birds and reptiles don't do that, so their red blood cells still have a nucleus in them. So they're actually not that efficient as oxygen carriers. Where they beat us, though, is that they're more efficient at getting oxygen in and out, in part because they have this air sac system, which extends into the bones and increases. So there's not a lot of air transfer going on the air in most of the air sac system, and certainly not what's going into the bones. But the way they have built their lungs fundamentally actually allows better oxygen transfer. So they're kind of more efficient at getting the oxygen in, but they're less efficient at carrying it around, and the two probably just about average out.
What are their lungs like then? That they're just better lungs?
The main thing that they do is their lungs are actually a circuit. So when we breathe in, the air comes in your mouth and down your trachea, and both of your lungs inflate and blows up, and then both of them deflate. So the air takes the exact same route. It comes all the way down and goes all the way back out. What birds, and we now know a bunch of reptiles, are doing is the air is basically coming in and going into one lung, and then across into the other lung, and then back out. So imagine it more like a coat hanger. So it comes down the side,
it's more like
round one, round the other, and then back out.
It's more like a circulatory system with your heart and your blood and everything else is what they're doing with the actual air.
Yeah, it's more complicated than that because they're shunting it between air sacs as well as the lungs in different places.
Does that mean they're breathing in and out at the same time?
No, so they...
Yeah.
Imagine if rather than kind of amorphous air, think of it as basically a unit of air.
Okay.
So the first unit will come in the mouth and into the first lung. Again, it's more complicated than that. It goes like into an air sac and then into a lung and then another, whatever. We'll just treat it as if they had two lungs and nothing else. So into lung one, from lung one to lung...
One. Here, I will deposit my oxygen.
Actually, it's probably doing more both simultaneously. And then from lung two, back to the base of the trachea and then back out the mouth. So
so it's spending a longer time in their system.
Yeah, and probably encountering more things. We didn't really finish talking about pneumaticity.
Sorry, no.
Pneumaticity is universal in birds, so all birds have it. Varies the degree to how much they have it. There are complicated systems of, say, these air sacs that expand from the lungs, and then they expand both into the body cavity and into the bones. We tend with dinosaurs to only ever really talk about the bones because, of course, the ones which would be in the body cavity, there's really no direct evidence for them.
Yeah.
You can sort of trace them, actually, from which bones get invaded. So some things just have it kind of in the neck, which would make sense because it's kind of an extension of the lungs and the sinuses. But then some get them in the arms and in the dorsal vertebrae. Again, relatively close to the body, relatively close to the lungs. But in more derived things, they go down into the legs, down into the arms. There's a thing called Areosteon, which I can't remember where Areosteon is from now. It's fairly closely related to the allosaurs. And that has things like pneumatic furcula, the wishbone, and things like this. And there's another one, the furcula. So we talked about this on our live video
back in August
for the 20 people who tuned in.
It got more than 20 people live. It's had more views since then.
Has it? Even better. But yeah, so we have clavicles, so the little bones that kind of run from your shoulder to your chest that you can feel just kind of under your...
They're the things that break when you fall off bicycles and things.
Yeah, and then your arm hangs down because your muscles don't hold it up anymore. Yeah. But in birds, they're fused together into a single bone, which is called a furcula, but you will colloquially know it as a wishbone. Yep. And then dinosaurs have that too, and they have a furcular. It's a fused one, and Velociraptor, T-Rex, all the way down actually to some Triassic things, and even in other lineages. So the early ancestors of the sauropods, we found a furcular for some of them as well.
Weird.
So again, it's a very common dinosaur trait, which for a long time was supposedly unique for birds, and we now see it all over the dinosaurian tree, and shows that it's been around for 100 million years before birds got going. So yeah, you've got your semilunate carpal, you've got your furcular, you've got your pneumaticity, you've got your uncinate processes.
One thing that I've seen on the Natural History Museum website is they sort of divide the dinosaurs up by their, I think it's their pubis, it's the hip bone sort of thing, the way that the tail and everything else is connected to the body. Explain all this to me, because this basically, it's how you divide up dinosaurs, isn't it?
So we've kind of mentioned this right back at the start, one of the first couple of episodes, and it's related actually to the kind of fundamental divisions within dinosaurs. So we have the Ornithyans, which we've mentioned a number of times. So that's your Stegosaurus and Triceratops and the Hadrosaurs and Ankylosaurs and all kinds of other things are all in a group called the Ornithyans, which literally means bird-hipped, because they have a feature which birds have, which is, if you look at their pelvis side on, a pelvis has three major bones. It has the ilium, which runs along the top. It has the pubis, which kind of points forwards, and it has the ischium, which kind of points backwards. And in birds, the pubis unusually points backwards. So rather than pointing forward, it's kind of reversed, and so it has both the pubis and the ischium pointing backwards. And so the Ornithyans are named for that because they have a backward-pointing pubis. Now, they actually sort of don't. What they have is this weird... Yeah, I know, it's one of these things that, like, that's an issue, except for the bit that doesn't. So what they actually more have is a kind of Y-shaped pubis, where one bit points forward and one bit points back.
Okay.
And then, of course, birds are not Ornithysian dinosaurs. Birds evolved from a group called the Saurischians, which have the normal condition of a forward-facing pubis.
This is wrong. Okay, so hang on. The thing which identifies the old dinosaurs as being like birds aren't the dinosaurs that turn into birds.
Yes. In the defence of the people who came up with this, it was a really good idea 150 years ago when we didn't know that birds evolved from Saurischian dinosaurs. And it was intended effectively as an aid memoir, not as a direct comparison, but as here's kind of what they look like so it's easy to remember, because everyone knew that birds had a weird pelvis.
So what sort of pelvis did theropods like T-Rex have?
All the sauropods and all the sauropodomorphs and most of the theropods have a classic Saurischian pelvis with a big forward-facing pubis. But once you start getting into the ones that are closest to birds, that slowly rotates. Ooh. And you find it pointing forwards and then mostly down and then very down and then slightly back and then mostly back. So we talked about...
that like through time as well as across species?
More or less, though, allowing for the enormous gaps in the fossil record and things that we don't have in places that we'd like to have them. But you look at something like the Therizinosaurs, which we've mentioned before, and the giant claws, but they're herbivores and they've really pushed the pubis quite a long way down. It's definitely not pointing backwards, but it's also not really pointing forwards either. And you can start to see how that's changing. And again, by the time you get to things like Velociraptor, Microraptor, the Troodontids, and the things that are very, very nearly birds, their pubis points backwards at this point. And so that is a feature that and it's very much a bird-like one, not like the weird kind of slightly Y-shaped Ornithysian one. And so, yeah, that is a unique feature.
Can't believe that they would do that to us, though. Why not just change it? Stop calling it Ornithysian. That's just annoying.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We'll just overturn 150 years of nomenclatural...
Just rename it. Just rename it.
Convention.
Or at least change the name in other things so you don't automatically assume. Okay. I want, from a structural engineering point of view, what's the difference between these pubises in terms of what they can do and what they can't do?
In the case of at least some of them, so things like Therizinosaurs and why we think probably the Ornithysians did it, because even though the Ornithysians now have this kind of Y-shaped one, what they don't have is a pair of pubes that meet in the middle. So they've kind of opened them up into this open space. Basically because it's opening the chest cavity up. And again, we've talked about this before. If you're a herbivore, you want to do lots of digestion of plants plants for a good long time, and therefore you want a really nice big gut. And so if you stick your pubes right into the middle of all of that, it does kind of limit the space in your chest cavity. Now, it is a pain for doing certain things in terms of your leg musculature, but on balance, the trade-off is probably in the favour of big gut. Quite why the birds did it when they did it the way they did it, that I don't know, because I do not know enough about their biomechanics.
Maybe they were laying more eggs or something. No, hang on, no, because they would have been the other way around, sorry.
No, they do lay a lot of eggs, relatively, or at least large eggs for their size. So things like Therizinosaurs may well be doing the same thing, because remember, those are herbivorous. But dromaeosaurs certainly aren't, and they're very close to birds and have basically a reverse pubis at this point. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't know that. I suspect it is known, I just don't know it.
I'm gonna say one word to you, okay? And that word is perching. Are they dinosaurs? Could most dinosaurs perch? Because I know Triceratops technically could rear up a bit like a bird, but they've got a big tail, so maybe not.
Perching classically involves the fact that the first toe, so the first digit on the foot, is reversed and basically points backwards. So that
of course. Yeah.
Some of the toes come round the front and one toe comes round the back. Various birds do weird things. So parrots have done a weird thing. So they have, I think it's parrots are what's called Zygodactyly, where they have like two toes pointing forwards and two toes pointing back. And tree creepers, and there's other arboreal birds. There's various weird versions, but your normal bird...
normal birds take their thumb, and it's their thumb that they've got at the back.
Yeah, so their foot will look much more like our hands if you point your thumb really backwards. That's what they're doing. So when they're gripping a branch, the three toes are going round at the front and one's going round at the back. I don't think there are any dinosaurs that we're confident could do that. So Archaeopteryx is one where there has been a fair amount of discussion, and people have looked in the literature and said they think it's doing that. But what it looks like is that actually that first toe probably has more flexion and can move in more directions, but as a result of the fossil then getting basically flattened when it's preserved, that toe has kind of been pushed backwards. Right. So it's more that it's been forced into a position that makes it look like it's pointing backwards, rather than it could actually do that. And therefore perching appears to be a more derived characteristic which came along after the origin of powered flight and things were really quite up in the trees a bit.
But we've talked a bit about their posture and how they have that S-curved neck a bit like a bird would. I mean, I'm obviously talking about theropods here. Is that bird-like or is that not bird-like?
Yeah, when you see these fossils, they are often remarkably bird-like in how they look. There's a lovely photo in a big book on Archaeopteryx of a dead pheasant where it had decayed and it was basically just left with the big wing feathers and the big tail feathers. And it's almost identical to the famous Berlin Archaeopteryx specimen, which is on the cover of every single textbook. So that's quite similar. But actually, in terms of kind of like living postures, there's some real similarities. I'm pretty sure we've talked about them brooding on eggs when we did the eggs episode. That is the same. We now have multiple dinosaurs sat on nests of eggs. And if you've seen a hen on a nest or anything like that, it's the same. They've got the feet under the body and their arms and therefore effectively wings at this point are outstretched and pointed backwards and would have been covering the eggs effectively. It's a pretty characteristic brooding posture, and we see it only in birds and dinosaurs. And even just this resting posture. So we have two dinosaurs. The more famous one is a little thing called May, which means the sleeper or sleeping.
That's M-E-I. Yeah.
M-E-I, yeah. That's a rare one like Tyrannosaurus rex, where it's mostly named by its full name, which is Mei Long, so sleeping dragon. But Mei Long isn't the only one. We've got a couple of others like this as well. And it was preserved in a resting posture. It's often described as sleeping. I stuck in a paper that I don't think that's a particularly good term, because lots of animals will enter these postures when they're not asleep and they're just resting. So I think resting posture is a better term than sleeping posture.
Or dying, as it turns out.
Well, right, but animals that are taking shelter from things. Again, for if you chase chickens around a farmyard, which I did as a kid on my grandparents' farm, one of their kind of defensive postures is they end up kind of squatting down and hiding. Now, they are not asleep. They are very alert and awake, but the posture is actually quite similar. But anyway, we see this. So you see the legs folded up under the body. You see the arms folded up by the sides. And again, thanks to their semilunate carpal, their hands are pointed backwards. And then the head and the neck is tucked under one arm. And if you've ever seen a duck or a goose asleep at the side of a pond or a lake or a canal, that is exactly what they do. They turn around, point the head backwards, and put their beak, or in this case the nose, back under one of the wings. And we have dinosaurs preserved like that.
So we can presume that they didn't sweat very much and therefore didn't have bad BO because of... Unless they really like the smell of their own BO, of course.
That's always likely to be a reasonable inference, yes.
Oh, excellent. That's...
They did not have sweaty, smelly armpits. I think we can go with that one quite safe.
Did they have... Because, if you've ever looked at the back of the chicken, right, they've got this little spot with ooze coming out of it, which is their... They
have an oil preening gland, basically, which produces oil and they can use it for their feathers.
Do you think dinosaurs had that?
I wouldn't be at all surprised if they did. We don't know because that's a soft tissue structure.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't preserve, and there's no... So we talk about soft tissue structures that you can't see. We also talk about kind of a thing called osteological correlates. So in other words, things that turn up in the bones that we know correlate with soft tissue structures. For example, actually, pneumatic bones. We can't see the air sac, but the fact that there's a hole in the side of the bone opening up into the bone where there's a big cavity and a very thin wall is a characteristic of this. This is one that's not going to have an osteological correlate, annoyingly.
They could have had like saliva or something adapted as well, couldn't they?
Things will groom in lots of different ways. There's been some tentative suggestions that some of the feathered dinosaurs had teeth that were adapted for grooming. That might sound a bit silly, but there are actually mammals that have something very similar. So a famous one is the Dimorphisms. So they're called colugos, or better known as flying lemurs, but they're not lemurs. So these are They're a giant...
I hate zoologists. I really do.
But this is actually why taxonomy is so important and why you should stick to formal taxonomic names, because when you say things like flying lemur or things like raptor, it can mean totally different things to different people. The Dimorphisms are a weird lineage of mammal which consist only of Dimorphisms. They're not rodents, they're not squirrels, they're not lemurs, they're Dimorphisms. But anyway, these big things, some of them are really quite big, from Southeast Asia. They're big gliders. They open their arms up with big membranes between all the things, and they glide around. And what a lot of them have is these little comb-shaped teeth. Literally, I've got a cast of a Dimorphiran skull at the office, and it has a whole bunch of little grooves in the incisors at the front of the mouth, just like a comb. And
cool.
We think that there's some evidence that they're basically using them like a little brush, because obviously their fur is really important at keeping their membranes clean and make sure they don't have parasites and stuff. And so they've specialised some of their teeth to help them groom.
Like a cat's tongue, but more permanent.
Yeah. But there are some fairly buck-toothed dinosaurs, and there are some with some odd kind of serrations on the teeth that don't quite match what we'd expect them to. And it is possible that they are doing something similar. Grooming is important to birds. Grooming is important to mammals. It is going to be important for big animals completely covered in feathers. There's one interesting question, is quite how did they do it? We've got things like Tyrannus. It's a tyrannosaur. It probably weighed a ton plus. Maybe getting on for 2 tons for a big one. How is that grooming places like the back of its neck? Its feet aren't going to reach, its arms aren't going to reach, its head's not going to be able to reach.
Well, isn't it like any other bird? But just because it's scaled up doesn't mean...
But birds have really flexible necks and usually long beaks. And tyrannosaurs really don't.
Okay. Does this imply that either they were bald in that spots that they couldn't reach, a bit like, the way the vultures just keep themselves clean by not having feathers there, or they were much more pack animals than much more social than we think they were?
So, there's a bunch of possibilities. Well, first of all, vultures are mostly bald because of heat loss rather than keeping clean.
I thought it's keeping clean.
That's often said. It's almost certainly not true. So could they have been bald there? In some, yes. In the case of Tyrannus, we have fossils that show it had feathers all across its body, so that's definitely not the case. They could have been doing mutual grooming with other animals. They could have been doing things like scratching on trees. They could have used effectively cleaner birds in the same way that we have...
Pine-scented Tyrannus. That'd be nice.
That's a little dangle for your rear view mirror. I'll get the museum to start selling them. But they might just do other things. There's things like the Sumatran Rhino, which few people have heard of, is really kind of furry. It's not like the other rhinos. And, of course, they cannot reach the back of their neck to have a good brush or anything like that. What do? They mollow in mud. They wallow in mud and do things like that. So you don't necessarily have to be able to reach every bit of you. You can roll in the mud, you can scratch yourself on trees and rocks. There are other ways round it, but the central point is you're right, grooming is going to have been important for these animals, and it would be very interesting to know quite how they're doing it and what the implications are for bits that actually they can't clean properly.
Another thing, though, I think we should bring up again, though, because we mentioned it when we were talking about the reproduction episode, and also identifying the sexes of the dinosaurs, is the medullary bone?
Medullary, sorry. I've only ever heard it as medullary. That doesn't mean that someone else doesn't call it medullary. It's one of those Diplodocus diplodocus things. Medullary may be correct, but I haven't heard it.
But this is because lady dinosaurs and lady birds do the same thing. When they need to produce eggs, they store extra calcium in their thighs.
Well, ladybirds are something else. They're little red and black insects that fly around and eat aphids.
Yeah, nice. I see what you did there. Clever, isn't it? Anyway, but
Sorry,
dinosaurs. But this is a thing that birds and dinosaurs both do. Is they store calcium.
Yeah, and so do some other reptiles as well. In fact, I think most reptiles do, but that at least does tie things together. And again, as we talked about in another episode this series, the elevated thermal physiology and the growth rates are showing that dinosaurs have, many, potentially nearly all dinosaurs have a relatively elevated metabolism that is more bird-like. And again, if you look at just living animals, the only things that have that kind of metabolism are birds and mammals. Birds are clearly not derived from mammals, though that was an idea that hung around for a very long time. I was reading papers on that when I started my undergraduate degree. It was a dying hypothesis, but there were still a couple of people going, no, they've got all these physiological traits in common. Somewhere birds ultimately evolved from mammals. It was called the homotheria, so the hot, basically literally the hot animal hypothesis.
Okay, so when were there birds then? Were there birds? I mean, because I know there's this idea that, the asteroid hit and then the dinosaurs all died out and then there were birds, but presumably the birds must have been around before the asteroid hit.
Yeah, for the thick end of 100 million years.
Okay, quite a while then. Quite a while.
Yeah, so there's this kind of myth that, because the birds survived and the extinction of the dinosaurs, in some way the kind of dinosaurs turned into birds as a result or through that process. No, they'd been around for about 100 million years at this point. So it's one of those odd little contrasts. So the transition from non-bird to bird through dinosaurs, through all these different lineages and the evolution of all these different traits and their changes and their progressive evolution and increase or development, is one of the best documented transitions in biology. If you want to know how you fundamentally change one lineage into something really very different, in this case, birds that fly, the dinosaur-bird transition is one of the best that we have. It is spectacularly well studied and with a phenomenal amount of fossils that deal with it. The exact origins of them are really uncertain, though, because we've got a huge gap right where we'd want it. So the middle Jurassic...
Okay. That's really early.
Well, Archaeopteryx is somewhere in the mid to late Jurassic.
Whoa.
So we've already got Archaeopteryx even then. So most of these spectacular feathered dinosaurs that have come out of China are from the early Cretaceous. So these are lineages which their ancestors appeared before birds, but those individual species have come.
So Archaeopteryx was before T-Rex. That's weird in my head.
Yeah, by a huge margin, by like 75 million years. Yeah.
You might not know this, but I want to ask it. Do you know, have we got a bird fossil? I know we got Bellur, don't we? Because we're talking about whether Bellur is a bird or not. But do we have any actual, like sparrows? I don't know, ducks? Is there anything that we found
So there is an alleged possible duck type animal in the Cretaceous.
Oh, wow.
It's probably not a duck in the sense that you are thinking of a duck. But basically, no, but right, so, because you've got to remember how we describe groups and define groups. So, there are basically three big splits into birds. There's the Paleognaths, which is ostriches and kiwis and rheas and some other stuff. There is the passerines, which is almost all birds, and the other group is the Gallo-anseriforms, which is the game birds and waterfowl, and that is ducks, geese, turkeys, pheasants, chickens, and all this stuff. There is a putative duck relative, which is a Gallo-anseriform, so it's definitely from that group. So we know that group has evolved and split off before the extinction of the dinosaurs. And I believe the analysis suggested that it is on the duck side rather than on the chicken side. But of course, that's not the same as it's a duck.
Fair enough. So, potential duck in the late Cretaceous. That's quackers.
At a real push, yes. Oh, very good.
Well, let's go and speak to someone who's actually worked a little bit on research. I think she's worked on Archaeopteryx before, but we know her best as the punk biologist. It is Lucy Eckersley, so here she is on her Archaeopteryx investigating ways. I mean, what's your relationship with dinosaurs? Do you like dinosaurs? Did you ever?
I like dinosaurs. I think they're fantastic. I actually also did my undergrad dissertation on Archaeopteryx, but that was many years ago, so don't ask me to quote anything.
And what did you...
No, you're an expert!
What did you do on Archaeopteryx?
So I was looking at the kind of Archaeopteryx and the features that Archaeopteryx had in terms of bird-like features and dinosaur-like features. So things like whether it could extend its arms, wings, past its vertebral axis, so it could take off from a standing start like a pigeon does when you stamp it, and which it couldn't, apparently. And so it could only glide.
No, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And then it still had vertebrae in its tail, which birds don't have. It still had teeth, but there were many things. It was... It had quite large pectoralis muscles, which birds have, obviously, to power flight. Although you're going to tell me now it doesn't.
I don't know, but it doesn't have much, if anything, of a sternal plate, to my knowledge. So it's running off large muscles but a small sternum, which is a
exactly,
weird
yeah. And there was a discussion about.
So it's like beefed up.
Yeah,
it's chunky.
It didn't have the skeletal. It didn't have the keel, the sticky out bit that all of that muscle attaches to. It just had a pretty decent sized muscle, and it didn't have the correct ligament that runs through that area that allows for that flapping flight. So my kind of conclusion was that it probably lived in an area, again, from what we know, with lots of trees and lots of larger pterosaurs, and one of the mechanisms that it used to get away from those animals was it would glide, and it would do phugoid gliding, so it would just glide away from them rather than like flapping powered flight. So that is essentially all of my knowledge of dinosaurs.
Oh, it's a good dissertation.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. It's more than I knew.
It was pretty fun. But yeah, since then, I've mostly been working on animals that I can like grab and touch now, like fluffy ones and stuff.
Made of rock.
So exactly, yeah. I have got to say, I had enough of the like very flat animals. I wanted like a 3D animal at that point.
Archaeopteryx does suffer excessively from flatness. It's a real problem. Is that it's been run over
every time. Always in that position.
How many Archaeopteryx specimens are there? Because I know there's the famous one, which is what, 1920s, or is it even earlier? It's 1890s.
Oh no, much earlier.
Darwin time.
Yeah, 1850. So Darwin, not too long after The Origin of Species was published, we have Darwin writing a letter to one of his colleagues saying how pleased he is that Archaeopteryx has been found, because one of the things he'd been criticised for is he argued that there were these transitional forms, we just hadn't found them yet. And then, lo and behold, a long-tailed, toothy bird with feathers turns up, which pretty much nail on the head for what he was arguing for. So definitely around that time. There are about a dozen specimens, mostly fairly complete, as in most of a skeleton, but there's some that's a head. There's one called the chicken wing, because it's basically just an arm. But Archaeopteryx has had quite a lot of revisions to its taxonomy recently, And what was one genus and one species is now 3, if not 4 genera, I think.
Lucy's getting very excited by this.
This is...
Yeah, so it's changed repeatedly. So what a few years ago was Archaeopteryx and there was only 12 specimens and everyone knew the 12 specimens, and now it's much more complicated.
This is very exciting, but also I think that's one of the things that like makes you feel older, is when stuff that you studied in your degree is now not true at all.
Yeah, it's not what you thought it was. Yeah, and yeah.
Do you have a question that you want Dave to answer? You'd like Dave to answer? It doesn't have to be about Archaeopteryx. It could be about anything.
Well, dinosaurs would be good.
Yes.
I've got a question about dinosaurs, and it's kind of bringing in a bit of what I do. So I do a lot of wildlife photography, and because of lockdown, I do a lot of bird photography because that's what's around me at the minute. And so birds are extant dinosaurs, and they're what we have now that you have evolved from dinosaurs. And so many of them have such incredible sexual dimorphism. You know, you can see that in birds that you see just in your garden. Absolute differences between the male and female of the species. And so I was wondering what we knew about sexual dimorphism in dinosaurs, and if we could pin down any particular traits or ornaments that any species had.
Oh boy. So
just, like a really easy little question.
This is something I know loads about, and I've written about a dozen papers on this over the last 7 or 8 years.
Buckle up, everyone.
So, the really short version is that evidence for sexual dimorphism in dinosaurs is almost non-existent. It's been claimed multiple times for loads and loads and loads of different species, and there's a whole bunch of apocrypha out there which really need to die horribly. A big one being that Tyrannosaurus females were bigger than males. That's like a thing. And that really commonly, that comes around again and again and again and again and again. And there is no evidence for it whatsoever. It was suggested once, because actually in birds of prey, it's very common that females are bigger than males. But these have all kinds of weird ecological drivers associated with them, and hunting and nest defense and stuff, which really wouldn't affect Tyrannosaurs. So there's no reason to think predatory dinosaurs would be under the same selective pressure of birds of prey. Therefore, there's no reason to think that females would be bigger than males. The idea that actually you can spot that there is a bigger and a smaller Tyrannosaurus, which one would rather would be male or female, again, has been suggested multiple times. The data doesn't stack up. And I've written a couple of papers on this stuff, specifically with a friend of mine called Jordan Malland, who's works for the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa. And what we were looking at is actually this problem is, can you even tell this in dinosaurs? Because in dinosaurs, you've got a couple of big problems that you don't have in other things, or in living things. So first of all, our data set's really quite limited. Like, we've got loads and loads and loads of T-Rex fossils, but most of them are bits. The number of decent animals that we've got where you can make a reasonable estimate of how big that animal was is a couple of dozen at most, and probably less than that. So it's not like we've got hundreds and hundreds of individuals. We've got 20, maybe 30 at a real push. That's not a lot to work from. The second problem that we have is the way that these animals grow. If you look at mammals and if you look at birds, what they tend to do is they grow very, very fast to get to their adult size, and then they really slow down. And they might grow a bit more, but they basically hit adult size and stop. So if you take an animal that lives a long time, we're a great example. I mean, we're a bit unusual, of course, but even if you take, big birds like ostriches, like albatross, like hornbills that might live for 20 years, they're basically full size within 2 or 3 years. So for a 20-year lifespan, 90% of that time, they're one size, and that's adult size. Whereas dinosaurs aren't doing that. They might grow quick, but it takes them years and years and years to get to full size. And so that means if you sample a random selection of the population, most of the time you're not getting adults at full size. Or at least, even if you are getting them more often than not, they're still only a relatively small percentage of your data set compared to if you did it for mammals.
How do you know then if you're looking at an adult dinosaur? Would it be like growth plates that have been fossilised?
That's a
growth plates. What's a growth plate? Honestly,
so now we're getting into more subdivisions. So, growth plates are mostly a mammalian thing, though they do turn up in some other stuff, including pterosaurs, weirdly, but not dinosaurs or crocodiles. And that's when long bones are growing, there's basically a little gap at each end. So you have the main bit of the bone, and then a little gap at each end, and then the end bit of the bone. And those gaps is basically where all the growth is going on, or at least a huge amount of the growth to make them longer.
So that's why your knees hurt more than like the middle of your legs when you get growing pains?
Possibly?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know. But anyway,
me and Issy are both 6 foot, so we do remember the growing
Dave's massive as well. Dave's proper size. Yeah. We're all human size here. Don't worry.
But yeah, no, dinosaurs don't have growth plates, annoyingly, but they do have, or at least not in limbs, but things like their vertebrae, so the backbone, as with all vertebrates, basically, it comes in 2 chunks, and those chunks fuse together when they're getting close to adult size, when they're finishing growing. So that's one way we can tell them, for example. Another one is things like their ornamentation features, things like frills on ceratopsians. They start small, and when those animals get close to adult size, they tend to inflate and become very big very quickly. So if they've got all the kind of bells and whistles, they're probably adult size. If they've got fused vertebrae, they're probably adult. If they're very big, if you've got lots of them, and these are all the big ones, those are probably the adult ones. So yeah, there are ways of telling adults from juveniles. So going back to our sexual dimorphism, and of that data set, we probably don't have that many animals that are proper full adult size and may themselves even keep growing. And even if most of them are adult, again, if it was mammals, it would be 90+%, and it's dinosaurs, and it's only 50 or 60%. That still really constricts your data set. And between those two factors, it means pulling out differences between males and females is extremely difficult. If you imagine that on average, males are 20% bigger than females, that's a pretty big discrepancy. There's some really good studies on reptile sexual dimorphism, and 20% bigger in linear terms for males and females puts you at the upper end. There are not too many species where there's that kind of difference. But when you're only dealing with a data set of what might be 12 or 24 animals that are at adult size, that's not enough to get any kind of statistical signal to pull them apart into 2. I mean, as Izzy was just saying, all 3 of us are about the same height, but you 2 are well above average height for women, and I'm a smidge over average height for men. So if we were the sample size, you can see why everything goes to hell. And the really short version of this is, particularly when you're talking about this kind of sexual dimorphism in terms of overall size, if you keep growing, a female that's, say, 4 or 5 years older than a male will be about the same size because she's got 5 years growth. And so it is going to be incredibly hard to tell older females from younger males. If you're a bird and you just grow to adult size and sit there, then if you did a big sample, you'd find lots of them that are big and lots of them that are a bit smaller, and you go, okay, and not much overlap in between the 2. It's fairly easy to say that there's 2 there. Even if you're not sure which is the male and which is the female, you would find 2 clusters. Whereas now we've got this horrible smear because those younger males are the same size as older females through almost the entire growth series until you get to the very upper end. That ruins it.
Yeah. I can feel your pain a little bit as well with like the small data set. So in doing my masters at the RVC, I worked with Scottish Wildcats, and there are like 30 Scottish Wildcats now-ish. Unfortunately, they are massively, massively critically endangered for lots of different reasons. But yeah, there's an extremely poor data set. And also there are so many biases in terms of like their behaviour and whether they're hybrids, in terms of how they behave and how likely it is that we will find that. I was looking at RTAs, so ones that have been hit by cars. And so how likely they were to be there was a biased number anyway. And I know there's loads of biases within the fossil record, so you've just got problem on problem on problem.
Yeah, exactly. So our analysis suggested that you need around about 40 animals of each sex to be able to reliably get a signal, provided they have relatively strong dimorphism of, say, 10 to 20% differences. We basically have almost no dinosaurs where we have, 40 plus 40, 80 specimens. Even if we do, there's no guarantee that that's a roughly even split between male and female. And even then, there's no guarantee that their dimorphism is big enough to fit our criteria. In other words, it's basically undoable, at least on the body size front. The second one is, do they have features where the males have it and the females don't? And again, they're almost nothing. We don't, there are no ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus. There are no things where one sex has a big frill and horns and the other doesn't. We have no Stegosaurus or Stegosaurs, which one has plates and spikes and the other doesn't have anything. There are things like the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, where there are some that don't have crests, but as far as we can tell, they are different. They appear at different times and in different places, the ones that do have crests. So it's not a male and female split. There are crested species and crestless species. We just don't have them. There's basically one that might be, there is I think a pretty good example, though incredibly known from actually only 2 specimens. And this is one of the oviraptors or Oviraptorosaurs from Mongolia. So the alleged egg eaters that were misnamed but actually probably ate eggs. So this is a kind of cassowary looking thing that's about 4 or 5 foot high, so shoulder height. Lots and lots of feathers. And we know that from some of the fossils of their near relatives in China, a lot of them have these beautiful tail fans, like a mini peacock fan on the tail. And there's a pair of specimens, literally 2, found side by side, died together in Mongolia, of these Oviraptorosaurs, where one has a tail with really quite different articulations to the other that make it look like it's very good for flipping it up and flipping it down and moving it around. And the suggestion is that that is the male animal, and it is good at flipping its tail up and down, because that would give you no real mechanical advantage for running and jumping and moving, because remember, there's lots of tail muscles attached to the legs. But it would be good if you had a little fan on the tail, which we know a bunch of them do, and you want to flap it around and do sexy dances with it. And the animal next to it is otherwise anatomically indistinguishable. It looks basically identical. It's the same species, only it doesn't have this way of flapping its tail around. And even though that's only 2 specimens, I think that's one of the actual probably best cases of sexual dimorphism with a male having a display feature that a female lacks that we have for dinosaurs.
Is there, and I know that probably the answer to this is the fact that in birds, it's much more likely for the male to have the ornamentation or to have the bright colours. Is there any particular reason that you're thinking it's the male that has that in that dinosaur, or is there a possibility it could have been the female?
There is a possibility. So in the vast majority of cases where you see these kinds of differences, where one is bigger than the other, or it has the flashy things that the other one doesn't, it's the male which is the special one, for want of a better phrase.
How dare.
Prettier. It's the male that's pretty.
Yeah,
showing off more.
The male which is more divergent from the ancestral state. Darwin made this point. You look at pheasants, for example, and all the females look pretty similar, and all the males not only look very, very flash and showy, they all look different to each other, which suggests that all the females are the same as their ancestors, and all the males have evolved into something a bit weird. And mostly this is just an investment thing. Laying eggs or giving birth or lactating, if you're a mammal, and things like this cost more energy. And so if you're the female, you are investing heavily in your offspring. And also, females are insured of maternity, whereas males are not insured of paternity. So as a female, it's worth investing in your offspring because at least you know they're yours. And so if females are putting loads of energy into their offspring, they don't necessarily have lots of energy for growing bigger or putting flashy things on or running around and fighting other things or going out and spending lots of effort finding a mate.
I'm feeling like a failed female here. How about you, Lucy?
Yeah, totally failed. Extremely failed female. I've grown really big.
I've grown really big too, and we both like fighting, so this is...
Fighting and brightly coloured hair.
Yeah.
Like, really failing here.
But every so often, either it's mutual and males and females are doing similar amounts of investment, and then males and females look very similar to each other. And I and colleagues have argued that this might be going on with a bunch of dinosaurs to explain why both sexes apparently have these features. Males are displaying to females and females are displaying to males. And every so often you get a thing called reversed sexual dimorphism, which is where the female is the bigger or showier one and do very male-like things. So the classic example
like
of this
Jacana.
is the Jacanas, yes, the lily trotters.
Yes.
So these birds with absolutely enormous great feet. They look like coots, but just their feet are twice as big as they should be. And yeah, females still lay eggs, but other than that, it's effectively everything is reversed. The males build the nests, The males sit on the eggs and do all the incubation. They look after the babies and do all the feeding. And the females grow really, really big, and they run around and beat the hell out of each other and fight for the right to get hold of males, and then beat the males up until the males mate with them, and then lay their eggs in the nest and make the males do everything and run away.
That sounds like a perfect life.
They're the bigger, showier animals, and they have completely, effectively flipped this system. And the females are acting like males, and the males who have much higher investment aren't the pretty ones and aren't the big ones and do all the work.
This is getting into it too much now, I know, but there are different...
No, it's not. Keep going.
There are different drivers for kind of sexually selected traits in extant animals. So, you know, the kind of... the different hypotheses for why birds look a certain way, and there's the idea of honest signalling. So the fact that you are healthy enough to be able to have these traits shows that you're a worthy partner. And I mostly just want to say this on a podcast, but could you talk about the sexy son hypothesis and whether dinosaurs have that?
Yeah, so there's these two kind of broad theories for why sexual selection operates, and one is runaway selection and one is sexy son hypothesis. Though sexy daughters also applies in context, but it's become called the sexy son hypothesis, with the idea that things are an honest trait. So I am a healthy animal because I've grown this great big flashy showy tail, which is effort and work, and then I have to spend time looking after it, and I have to drag it around.
And it looks lovely, Dave.
And then if any predators... Thank you. Predators are more likely to spot me and more likely to eat me. And so the fact that here I am showing off, going, look at my beautiful sexy tail, means that I must be doing something right. I have grown a big tail, and it is nicely coloured, and nothing has eaten me, and I have groomed it, so I clearly don't have any parasites, and I've got lots of food, and yada, 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 and therefore I'm worth sharing mating responsibilities with, and next generation, and this will kind of grow and grow. So the runaway one is the idea that for whatever reason, females, and of course not necessarily, but usually females are selecting males, females just like that look. For some reason they think that looks nice. And as a result of them liking the look of whatever that is, whichever male happens to look like that will probably have more offspring. And, of course, his sons will inherit the tendency to look like him, and his daughters will inherit his mother's tendency to like that look. And you can see how that can accelerate quite quickly with more and more daughters liking more and more males that look like that, and the whole thing, again, can accelerate. On average, I think the sexy son hypothesis, I think most people think, is what's happening most of the time. But there are at least a couple of examples of runaway sexual selection and hypothesis apparently in operation. So one is swordtails. Anyone who's kept tropical fish probably knows mollies and swordtails, these fairly small, pretty little things. And swordtails literally just have a big spike off the bottom of the end of the tail. Mollies are a very close relative of swordtails and don't have this. If you take a male molly and just glue a little kind of fake swordtail onto the end of him, female mollies think this is the best thing ever and go nuts for these males. There's no particular obvious advantage for it. There's no particular previous selection for this. They just seem to like it. Well, for whatever reason, they are hardwired to think that this is sexy. And you can see, therefore, how, presumably, at some point in the evolutionary history of this lineage, one of the males grew a little spike, and the females went, well, hey, and it didn't take long before swordtails were a thing. And as far as we can tell, that's more or less runaway sexual selection an idea in operation. What's causing that, we don't necessarily know. I really haven't read up on it much. My suspicion is that it's probably something to do with just looking different. Lots of animals in the wild have relatively small pools of available partners to reproduce with. Inbreeding, so reproducing with relatively close relatives, is generally not a good idea. At some level, you want them to be fairly close to you because you want your own genes to do well. And if they're a relative of yours, you will have some more of your own genes there, and so that will pass on. On the other hand, if you're too close, any nasty genes that you have are more likely to double up and knacker things. But in general...
Hey, Charles Darwin married his own
exactly,
cousin, so.
Right. And it's interesting, actually, if you look at the basic genetics, a straight first cousin is about the first time that the odds shift very heavily from there likely to being problems with any children to there not being any problems. And my understanding is that if you look in most cultures, that is like the big barrier. Anything closer than first cousin is often a huge taboo. First cousins are generally considered frowned upon but okay, and anything beyond that everyone considers fine. And it aligns really quite closely with the odds when you do the basic genetics. But I suspect that side of runaway sexual selection, and at least as we're seeing it in things like mollies and swordtails, is probably linked to something that looks a bit weird and a bit different and a little bit exotic, is probably nice and unrelated, has a very different gene set. That's really good for immunity against all kinds of parasites and diseases. Novelty is really good for resisting parasites and diseases, and that might just inherently be attractive. So it might be less that they're hardwired for that particular little trait, and then that trait happens to pop up and then everything kicks off, and more that anything that looks a bit different is suddenly really appealing.
So does this mean that, if there was a T-Rex out there who had blue eyes, suddenly they'd have done ever so well, and there'll be lots of T-Rex with blue eyes?
Quite possibly.
Nice.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think you can make a at least tentative case for that whole thing in humans. We talk about, ooh, exotic, ooh, sexy. I mean, it is a thing that someone who looks quite different from what you're used to experiencing is immediately found attractive by, I think, most populations everywhere.
I really want to let him continue this so he digs himself a little hole somehow. But... yes. No, and who do you find exotic, Dave?
A deeper hole. I've already started digging.
Well, Lucy, does that answer your dinosaur questions as to who Dave finds attractive?
Yeah, it does. I think it's a really difficult area, and I like how you were like, well, there's not much evidence, but I have published loads on it in the past. So
that's really confusing that it's the secret sexy sun syndrome. It isn't the ones with the sexy sun. Oh my gosh, that's so confusing.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that there's two different selection methods happening. That's quite exciting.
Yeah, and there is evidence for both of them. So at the time when these things were kind of came up with, they were competing hypotheses, and the expectation is that probably it was one or the other in just about every case. Certainly, it is harder to find evidence for kind of runaway versus this handicap idea that shows that you're very healthy. But there are at least a couple of examples of it. So it is definitely a thing, and it is not an either or. And therefore, of course, almost inevitably, there's probably somewhere it's some kind of combination of both.
Birds of paradise, they're just weird.
Birds of paradise are amazing. Yeah. They're impossible not to like. But there itself is, their nearest relatives are the lyrebirds, which have gone down a totally different route. And just rather than make themselves pretty, put all their effort into making pretty things, which is wonderful.
I'll do it now. Do an impression of a lyrebird. Hello, I'm a lyrebird. They sound like us. They're terrifying. Anyway, or they can sound like a drill or whatever.
There's that Attenborough video, and there's the one that mimics chainsaws and car alarms and SLR cameras clicking. Yeah. And yeah, people think parrots are good mimics. I mean, these are frightening.
I mean, this is the thing, like, ravens can mimic, parrots can mimic, lyrebirds can mimic.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if it turned out that T-Rex could whistle?
There's a paleoartist, I'm pretty sure it's a girl called Raven Amos, and she did a painting of bower tyrants. So tyrannosaurs that had built a little bower and stacked up bones and stuff.
See, if only.
It's a lovely idea, yeah.
If only we found that. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, I mean, that yeah. Wouldn't you want to dig that up?
Just go, we appear to have a lost civilization. Oh no, it was just a horny T-Rex. There we go, looking for a mate, making a lovely hut. Amazing. So cool. Thank you very much for listening this week. We will be back next week. But until then... Rawr.
Rawr.
Thank you for listening to the Terrible Lizards podcast. For bonus episodes and extra content, please visit our Patreon page. You can also purchase a mug, t-shirt or a Terrible Lizard face mask from Redbubble. Go to terriblelizards.co.uk for links. Send us your questions. Email terriblelizardspod@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook and Twitter. Include the hashtag Terrible Lizards. We hope to bring you more and more, but we can only do that if we get enough listeners. So please like, share, leave a review and subscribe.